Coming here, we were so happy that the Armed Force of Malta conducted the rescue, doing a humanity job, because the Armed Force, we know in Africa, were the one that forced us out. And then all of a sudden, we end up in a detention, and our happiness went down again because we couldn't understand. We had no idea of, coming to Europe and end up in these places. From there, we came up with the idea that you are not welcome here, even though you are rescued. This is the reality, and you have, to face it and adapt to it.
Welcome to Malta, a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. To the north, there is Italy and the European Union, and to the south, there is Libya and Tunisia. The island lies right between Africa and Europe, in the sea strait where the illegalized travelers, the migrants that you constantly hear of in the news, attempt to cross the sea to reach in Europe for safety. Hello Europe, I'm your host Mohamed Ba, and this is the City Rights Radio. In this podcast you hear the voices of refugees and migrants around Europe that is collected for an audio reportage about European policies on migration and their impact on the ground. Now we live in times where everything is fast, especially information, and news about migration is always superficial. So for this podcast, we strive to give enough space for migrants to talk. Welcome to Migration Chronicles, the podcast about surviving border politics.
Allô? Pardon, pardon. Ça va même pas. Moi, je suis enceinte, ça va pas. L'enfant est malade. L'enfant est malade. Pas manger ni l'eau, il n'y a rien. Il y a un enfant ici. Moi, je suis enceinte. Elle a 7 ans. Ils ont dit qu'ils vont venir, on ne voit pas. Depuis avant, on ne voit pas. Il y a 2 personnes qui sont mortes ici même. Il y a bateau laissé ménager, c'est gâté. Il y a un peu qui sort dedans. Ça va pas, Wallet, ça va pas.
What you just listened to is a distress call by 47 people on a boat in distress in the Maltese waters. That was published by the NGO Alarm Phone a few years ago. The woman in the audio asked for help, saying that she is pregnant and that there is nothing to eat for her 7 years old. She then adds that the authorities said they were on their way to rescue them, but no one showed up. Calls like this are a daily bread for Alarm Phone, which is an organization that provides a 24/7 active mobile number for distress calls by migrants at sea, and then passes their position to humanitarian rescue associations or the national rescue authorities.
Europe has set up a lethal regime around its borders. This is why many people have to take dangerous routes across the sea in order to exercise their freedom of movement. The journey is very long and people frequently end up in distress at sea. However, authorities often do not react, do not assist, or even carry out interceptions or pushbacks when people call them for help. This is why people call the alarm phone, an activist phone hotline operating 24/7, 365 days a year. We support people on the move at sea or on land by putting pressure on the authorities to rescue people in distress and take them to a safe harbour in Europe. The alarm phone is a transnational network, operating from several different cities in North Africa, West Africa and Europe.
I can say thank God, Alhamdulillah. Why I say Alhamdulillah? Because for Malta to remove me from the Mediterranean Sea, I appreciate them a lot. Because if not in Malta, I'm supposed to die in the Mediterranean Sea.
Aboubakar from Sierra Leone is very grateful to Malta for saving him and his child at sea. They were rescued by the Maltese authorities on the 24th of November 2021. What he did not say, however, was that the boat had been drifting for more than 10 days within the Maltese search and rescue zone, without Malta doing anything about it. And in this period, a number of travelers had died of dehydration. Aboubakar and his child were lucky to have been rescued. Daniela De Bono is a researcher at the University of Malta, and she helped us shed light on the reality of the Maltese search and rescue area.
Yes, so Malta has a large search and rescue area, and as a country, It draws profit from the search and rescue area because every ship and every vessel that flies through this area in air and on the sea, there is a revenue, there is a tax that is paid to Malta. But in tandem with this, there's also a responsibility to save anyone who's in distress at sea. So what's been happening in the past, what we have been observing in the past years, is that migrant boats that leave from Libya, right? These are usually dinghies. They are vessels which can't really make it all the way to Sicily. Sometimes, they're already half deflated when they leave Libya, right? They leave in a rush. And so if they start taking in water and they're in the Maltese search and rescue area, they call the Maltese authorities, or they call alarm phone, or they call some relatives who inform the Maltese authorities that there's a boat in distress. We have been observing that these calls of distress are not always answered. And this is a problem because from our observations, we can see that, some boats disappear. These boats don't have a radio, right? So they can't be seen. And so you need a rescue mission. You need a search and rescue mission that is deployed immediately when you have a distress call. A migrant boat that leaves Libya is always a boat in distress because it has too many people on board and it's unseaworthy. For the Maltese authorities, they use a different definition of distress. They say, if the boat is not taking in water, if the engine is still working, then we don't really need to rescue this boat until there is a higher degree, let's put it that way, of distress. Wow. And this has produced situations where boats then suddenly disappear with 80 people on board.
Thousands of people have gone missing at sea in the last 20 years. The NGO Alarm Phone has declared multiple times through their reports and media communications that when they contact the Maltese authorities, they hang up the phone. A report published by Amnesty International in September 2020 accused the island's government of violating international law and human rights. These violations included pushback from the Maltese search and rescue area, delayed or denied rescues, redirection of boats to Italy, denial of a place of safety to disembark, and arbitrary detention of migrants and refugees at sea. We did try to contact both the Maltese Authority and Frontex, the EU Border Patrol Agency, by email and by phone to ask them about these issues. We didn't receive any answer from the Maltese Authority, and Frontex refused to have an interview with us. It could be that they're way too busy to answering calls. It could also be that their refusal to reply represent a lack of institutional transparency, maybe to avoid facing responsibility. Just for context, we are not talking about the Atlantic Ocean here. We are talking about the Sicily Channel between Libya, Tunisia, and Italy, one of the most highly patrolled strips of sea on Earth. The EU put 845 million euros into Frontex budget that include drones and planes that are used to constantly monitor crossings at sea. It was even double the budget of the previous year. And still, this is the most lethal border crossing in the world. Oliver Costi, a member of the search and rescue NGO Sea-Watch on Frontex.
So it's quite clear. I mean, I don't know if you remember, there was this submarine that was a search for, basically you could follow live what's happening with the submarine. That's exactly the amount of effort you put when someone is in risk of losing their lives. It is obviously deeply racist. There is no chance that tens of thousands of people would have drowned in the Mediterranean if they were white Europeans. I would say the goal of Frontex is most of all to make sure no one reaches Europe, no matter what. So I think Frontex is highly complicit in human rights violations on the borders at sea, and I think that's not a secret. That's proven. There's reports, but there's also no consequences. You have the situation that people are sometimes at distress at sea for days. People know their, like, authorities know where they are, they know their location, but they're just not acting. And we had very tragic shipwrecks last year. We have the highest death toll since 2017. And this is not at all, so it doesn't have to do with there's too many people coming. It doesn't have to do with there's not a solution, there's not the means. Like, if you just take the smallest percentage of the Frontex budget, you could easily finance a rescue operation in the Mediterranean. So there's just no political will to do that. So that's the problem.
The issue of refusing to rescue people at sea is a serious human rights violation. We investigated the matter and found that the first documented case in Malta date back to 2012. A rubber boat carrying 72 people adrift in the Maltese search and rescue zone had been at sea for 14 days before drifting back to Libya. What you are going to hear is the testimony of Haile Gebre, one of the survivors, in an interview with journalist Lorenzo Pezzani from Forensic Oceanography.
The weather very bad at this time, okay? It's very, very bad, okay? Then we don't have any more fuel, okay? Just we are searching, move according to the movement of the wind, okay? People staying, okay? We are starting to drink
the water from the sea.
Yeah, the water from the sea. We have some Colgate, you know, what you call it? Yeah, Colgate.
The toothpaste.
Yeah, toothpaste, okay? Dehydration too much, okay? After 5 or 6 days, from 72 people, almost half maybe, the other people are dead, okay?
The boat had been sighted by at least an airplane, several fishing boats, a military helicopter, and a ship.
The helicopter started to move around us 4 or 5 times, okay? So they came to us close, okay? The captain, at the same time, the captain told us, this one is the rescue.
We are safe, yes.
We are safe now, no problem. He didn't tell us. We put everything in the sea.
Everything. GPS, satellite phone, and compass.
Yes.
Because he was afraid if they know that he was the driver, they might he might have problems.
So he told us, okay, I'm sorry now. I don't want the Italian to arrest me again, okay?
The coordinates of the boat had been communicated to Italy, NATO, and Maltese rescue authorities, but the boat was left to go adrift.
We got helicopter, okay? After we got this helicopter, at the same time, maybe 3 hours later, we got also the same helicopter, okay? They drop us some waters, some breads, okay? What you call it? Biscuits, okay?
Say, what were they, could you speak to them?
No,
or
they don't give us a chance to speak to them, okay? We only just watching everything there, then they left us. We just find the boat, okay? This French boat, okay? We just asked them for help, okay? They didn't give us anything, okay? They only getting pictures of it, okay? They left us alone, okay?
In the middle of the sea, deprived of food, water, under the scorching sun, and at the mercy of the wind, of the 72 people, only 9 people survived. Eventually, the current brought the boat back to Tripoli.
The Libya is a different story because there is like not that control whereby you can say there's a democratic government which is stable there. There's a 2 separate government. This in Benghazi, this in Tripoli. When I come in Libya, I was in Tripoli. Yes, but I was not very lucky because I was kidnapped in Libya. And when they kidnapped me, they take me, they need a ransom from me. And that time I don't have money, so I was getting beat and stuff and them. So I have to control family back home, so to free myself because I would have lost my life.
What you just heard is the story of DJ Paperfly, a Gambian music maker and refugee that we met in Malta. Libya is described by many migrants as hell on earth, and you cannot imagine the stories we hear from friends who had to go through Libya on their way to Europe. Since the beginning of the war in 2011, the country has been commanded by armed militias, where killing, torture, rape, slavery, and extortion against Black Africans have been reported along other human rights violations. Despite the blatant human rights violations in Libya, the cooperation between the EU and Libyan authorities is public knowledge. According to The Big Wall, which is an investigation by IrpiMedia and ActionAid, the EU allocated 44.5 million euros to equip, train, and support Libyan coast guards as part of the European support to integrated border management and migration management in Libya. Most of these funds were managed by Italy to provide patrol boats, engines, and military pickups to the Libyan authorities who were part of criminal militia groups committing serious human rights violations against migrants. Daniela on this cooperation.
The externalization of the border. So clearly, if the Libyan Coast Guard doesn't have the technological capacity to assess, and to find a boat, who is giving the orders to the Libyan Coast Guard to take a boat back to Libya, right? And it's clearly the Italian, the Maltese, Frontex, and so on that give this information because they have the technology and they have, they have the technology and they have the interest in a boat being returned back to Libya. But sometimes this has, it always has awful repercussions, right? We've had several cases of people who have spoken out both here in Malta and in Italy on, how they try to set out at sea and then the Libyan Coast Guard, brings them back to Libya. They are detained again. There's extortion of money, and then they try again and try again and try again. And even though there is some public knowledge of what's going on, it seems like the fact that it happens out at sea, it feels like it's far removed from people,
The sea acts as a natural border. It kills the migrants that Europe doesn't want. The position of those who survive the sea is given to the Libyan militias that the EU has equipped to become its coast guard. Others are pushed back to Libya or Tunisia, where detention and torture is the order of the day, which is a winning solution for the Maltese government and the EU.
And it has changed. The numbers are down. So at one point, Malta saw some 2,700 arrivals, for example. But I think last year or the year before, there were 300 arrivals. So the numbers have been drastically cut by not saving people at sea, allowing the boat to continue on its course or possibly drifting, or these pushbacks.
Any agreement between the EU and Libyan authorities concerning migrants at sea are illegal under international law. This was confirmed in a lawsuit in an Italian court on the 17th of February 2024. First, according to the international law of the sea, people in distress must be disembarked in a place of safety, and Libya is not a place of safety. In fact, the foreign ministries of all European states strongly discourage any travel to the country.
Travel advice for Maltese citizens to Libya. We strongly advise against travel to any part of Libya. The Libyan government lacks significant control over law enforcement and overall safety throughout the country. Despite a ceasefire agreement established in October 2020, violence can erupt unexpectedly, particularly between local militia factions, resulting in civilian casualties within urban and residential zones. Additionally, there persists a severe risk of abduction targeting foreign nationals.
The giving of position of migrants to the Libyan coast guards by the Maltese authorities is a clear violation of the Geneva Convention on Refugees. The principle of non-refoulement prohibits any state to push back asylum seekers to a state where they would risk being persecuted. This means that everybody coming into the Maltese waters cannot be sent back to Libya because they are possible asylum seekers and have the right to apply for asylum in Europe. From a migrant perspective, seeking safety in Europe and knowing that the EU is doing all it takes to stop people like us from coming here, and going to the extent of collaborating with countries that do unimaginable things to migrants, backed up by how we are treated when we arrive here and blaming us for all the problems in society, all while claiming to be countries of human rights and democracy, is traumatic in itself. Libya is not a safe place, and no one from our community will ever tell you that they would like to someday go and visit Libya after what they experienced there. The Hebrew case is the famous story of 3 young boys who were in distress in Maltese waters and pleaded to escape deportation to Libya.
There was a boat that left from Libya. The boat found itself in difficulty. So again, this is very much connected to what we were speaking about before. The boat already on the shore had too many people and was taking in some water. By the time it went out in the water, it started taking in more water, and there was a ship, a regular merchant vessel, that rescued the people on the ship, from the boat. They took them up on board, and there were around 100 people that came on board. There were some 6 people who decided they didn't want to risk it because they were scared that they would be taken back to Libya, and so they remained on this little dinghy, and we've never heard of them since. So when these 100 people were on board, the captain and the first mate were trying to contact different authorities to see what to do with these people. They started heading back towards Libya. The migrants, the travelers on board knew nothing about this. But in the morning, at daybreak, they recognized the Libyan coast, and in desperation, some people were about to jump overboard, and they started shouting, asking the captain, pleading with the captain not to take them back. But the captain and the crew had no means of communicating with the people on board, because many of them spoke Bambara, spoke languages that the captain and the crew couldn't speak. But there was this one little boy, a 15-year-old boy, whose name is Amara, whose mother had struggled to send him to an English-speaking school. And so he was put forward by the rest to speak and act as an intermediary with the first mate. And the first mate told him, what do these people want? And he was the go-between, right? He told him they are scared of going back to Libya. All this, has happened, and we haven't eaten for days, and so on and so forth. And the first mate explained to him, he told him, we don't have permission to go to Europe. We can't take you to Europe. What can we do? And so there was this whole communication between the captain and the first mate and the people on board, the travelers on board, that was taking place through this intermediary, Amara, and eventually another 2 people, Abdallah and Kader. The captain at some point, for some reason that we don't know, headed towards Malta. When the boat reached the Maltese coast, the travelers were escorted out of the ship, but the military came up and the police came up, and they arrested Amara, Abdallah and Kader and took them to prison. Amara says in this little article that he wrote, or maybe it was Abdallah, he said it, in the first few days we were sure it was a mistake, because of course, there was no violence on board, no nothing. He said we were so grateful, to be saved and to be in Malta, that we were sure that Maltese justice and the Maltese police would understand that this was a mistake and that we did nothing wrong.
What was the mistake?
So the charges against them were of terrorism, so a threat to the state, violence and threatening people, instilling fear in people on board. There are, some 10 charges that they were initially charged with, some of them carrying lifetime sentences, some of them carrying 10-year sentences. They're charges of the highest degree. And so the 3 boys, who were, 2 of them were underage, 15 and 16, and the third one was 18, were put in the adult prison in the highest security wing, right? As presumed terrorists would be. Eventually, after 9 months, so the court case, the preliminary collection of evidence, the court case started. After 9 months, they were released from prison, and they have been for almost 5 years now, waiting for the government to decide whether to officially charge them or drop the charges. just 3 months ago, the government decided to press forward with the charges and increase the charges too, with another 2. In this period of time, Amara, Abdallah and Kader have made friends in Malta. They have the right to work, and they have been, working very hard. Abdallah has a family. Amara has friends, and and goes to the gym regularly and does what any teenager does. Kader was at school. So they've lived their lives for the past 5 years with this threat of being imprisoned for life. All this because they acted as translators, right? They were translators in as a campaign. We call them heroes, right? Because they helped diffuse a very tense situation on board. So if it were not for them, there were people who would have died because they would have jumped overboard.
The story of Amara, Abdallah and Kader tells us something about the Maltese institutions. As in the rest of Europe, migrants are treated as criminals even when their intentions is to save lives. For those who survive the sea, the struggle continues on the island. Let's go back to Angelo.
And then all of a sudden, we end up in a detention, and, our happiness went down again because we couldn't understand.
Angelo spent 8 months in a detention center. For 8 months of his life as a 20-year-old, he could not work, he could not study, he couldn't do anything. He also explains that his detention was rather arbitrary. Up until this day, he doesn't know why he was put in detention for 8 months.
It is not the same thing for everyone who arrives here. There are some people who stay in detention center for more than 8 months, and there are those who stay there for less than 8 months. So it depends, and sometimes we question the legality of putting people in this place for unknown months. You don't understand. I came here and I stayed for 8 months. Another person came and stayed for 1 year. Another person came and stayed for 2 months.
Angelo is right. It is not legal under any international law to detain people without a proper process. The Geneva Convention states that asylum seekers must be treated with dignity. But under the current border politics of the European Union, migrants can be detained even when they have not committed any crime. And while they are in prison, they lose years of their lives.
And after 8 months, I was brought out to open center where I spent 6 months. And from 6 months, I was told to leave the open center to go and live on my own. So it was, from my side, it was good because I speak English and I have language advantage. But for other people that I know, it was really hard for them because they spent those 8 months in detention without learning language, without no any skills of survival. And when they came out, they were allowed to stay in open camp for only 6 months. They couldn't go out and work, and they had no proper paper to work with, and it was hard for them. So from my side, it was good because I speak language, and though there were some challenges, I managed to cope with it and find a place to rent. Yeah, the main issues is it's very hard for migrants to integrate into society. Many people are willing, and they are even complaining in those 8 months why they don't offer a Maltese class for us and show us a little bit about culture and the laws of the country. So when we come out, we come with ideas of how this country, things works. But it is very hard. There are blocks on both sides. Being shown you are not welcome, so you will have that one in your mind. And from the society too, seeing you with, being from different culture, and some with the stereotype of someone coming to change their culture, which is not actually, I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, I witness how migration where there is no integration create problems in societies. It's what caused civil war in Sudan. and I can't get out of that civil war, and come and do the same thing here. So when I came, I want, to integrate into society, to learn the ways of life and, to respect them. Yeah, but there are blocks when I see like I'm not welcome. It will be very hard for me, to force myself on society to accept me.
What we have seen in the last 20 years is that Malta has successfully, not successfully, right, but has applied this policy of detention for 20 years of all asylum seekers for 20 years before Italy was doing it and before Greece was doing it, right? So in the past, when I started working in this area, there were a lot of European reports and there were a lot of derogatory comments against the Maltese government by Italian government officials and other EU officials saying, asylum seekers should never be detained. The right to asylum is sacrosanct. If someone enters a country, in an unauthorized way in order to seek asylum, then they should not be detained. And Malta kept detaining these people, citing, other laws and other reasons, amongst them, foremost of them, the sovereign right of a state to manage people who are unidentified. Come 2015, with the increase in mainly Syrian arrivals, but others too, the European Union started working on the European agenda on migration. I think it was published in 2015. And with the European agenda on migration, the hotspot approach was proposed as a way to manage flows of people. And the hotspot approach basically, in not so many words, said all the people who arrive on your shores using these channels, right? Leaving from Libya, leaving from Tunisia, leaving from Morocco, leaving from Egypt, maybe Lebanon, all these people have to be put in a center and you can detain them, which is what Italy started doing immediately. So it was only in 2015, 2016 that we saw that Italy started detaining all asylum seekers, right? Because most of these people apply for asylum on arrival if they're told that they have the possibility of applying for asylum. And so that's why, sometimes I see Malta as being, because Malta is a small country and policies could be changed a little bit faster, I think different countries look at different models and how it's working. They saw, they must have observed the Maltese model, and it's now been incorporated in other southern Mediterranean countries.
Migrant detention happens all over Europe, but Malta was among the first to implement such rules to all migrants arriving on the island. As Daniela clearly explained, Malta has been sort of a laboratory for EU border politics. The latest pact on migration and asylum that is presented by the EU Commission will pave way for increasing migrant detention practices all over Europe. Since the moment migrants arrive on European soil in Malta, they are enclosed in dehumanizing conditions. With detention becoming the new norm, people are subjected to a whole array of human rights abuses.
The applicant lived in the same block with 23 other people, including adult men. They had to wash their clothes in the same bucket that was provided to clean the floor. Since they had only one outfit, they had to change clothes between them when washing, and NGOs had been refused the opportunity to donate warm winter clothes to the detainees on the basis that they had already been given tracksuits. The block did not have any common room, chairs, tables, or praying room, and the mattresses were visually old and used. The bedroom had one window which could not be opened. There was no natural light and was very dark. The room was very humid and cold. There was no heating system nor any ventilation, despite the high humidity encountered in Malta during the winter. The applicant further reported that detainees had to clean the premises themselves and had no access to drinkable water, thus being obliged to drink from the tap despite the low quality of this water. There had been no regime of activities nor any outside area, no phone to make calls, and thus he could have no contact with the outside world. Most of the space in the container was occupied by the beds, the toilet, and the shower, and there was limited space to move around. The applicant indicated that he was suffocating inside and could not breathe properly. When it got too hot, the guards refused to switch on the air conditioner. The applicant claimed that he could not communicate with the guards or his co-detainee, who could only speak French, and there was no interpreter available.
This is part of a claim to the European Courts of Human Rights against Malta in favor of a minor from Ivory Coast. The applicant mentioned in this court was put in detention for 225 days, despite having been diagnosed with PTSD and depression. The boy was on the same boat as Aboubakar, who was also stranded for 10 days at sea. But unlike Aboubakar, this Ivorian kid was not as lucky. The claim eventually ruled that Malta had to pay 25,000 euros to compensate him for the harm.
It's not good. If we're looking at human rights of asylum seekers, refugees and migrants, we have seen the situation decline. An increase in people being detained, detention conditions are bad, open center conditions are bad, and quite often we meet people recently released from detention and they have no idea what's going on. I mean, beside the fact that they know that they are in Malta, and everybody you meet who spent time in detention in Malta is afraid to go back.
To understand more on the issue of detention centers in Malta, we went to interview Katrine and Beth from JRS. JRS is an international humanitarian NGO together with the Auditus Foundation, the most important human rights lawyers organization in Malta. They conduct legal battles and advocate for the rights of migrants in detention.
I think there's always a risk of arbitrary detention, especially when the immigration authorities, or the authorities in general, but it could be mostly the immigration in this case, but it could also be the health authorities, apply kind of blanket rules that apply to everyone without any kind of individual assessment. So if, for example, asylum seekers from safe countries, whoever they are, and whatever their personal circumstances, are almost automatically detained, the risk of arbitrary detention, obviously, is very high.
We have detention centres, which are initial reception centres, which are for detention on the basis of public health. So when people arrive, they are de facto detained while they are screened for their health.
One person arriving in Malta could start out detained for health reasons, because as Beth explained, people who come to Malta by boat, asylum seekers who come to Malta by boat, are always detained on arrival. Then once he's medically screened, the immigration authorities issue a detention order, and he will be detained until, he could be detained until up to nine months, let's say until his asylum application is determined, and if he or she is rejected, their application is rejected, they could end up detained then on the basis of a removal order to await removal. And there, the time limit for detention is 18 months. Okay, so you could have a person who goes from one detention regime to another, effectively living and staying in the same space, and deprived of their liberty, for different reasons, but still, if you put them after each other for a very long time, over 2 years in some cases, well over 2 years in some cases, which is a very long time.
And in this very long time, we don't really know what happens inside the detention centers because nobody is allowed in. JRS is the only NGO in Malta that is allowed inside the detention centers, but even for them it is difficult to advocate and negotiate with the government.
I think the first obstacle we find is in your question, talking to the government. I mean, it's very, very difficult. It's been difficult, but now it's, I think, possibly the most difficult it's ever been, particularly with the ministry that makes these migration policies. They don't speak to us. And, there's an agency for detention, but they make it very difficult for us to communicate with them, for us to access detention.
In December last year, a Maltese court ruled that the refusal to grant journalists access to detention centers and prison is a breach of the right to freedom of expression. Still, detention centers are closed to the public, and even well-known activists and organizations have very limited access with the people inside. The condition of asylum seekers in Maltese detention centers is unknown to the public, which in itself is not good for transparency. We went to see the detention centers on a Sunday afternoon. They are located in Halfar, which is an industrial area to the south of the island. After taking 3 buses, we found ourselves in the middle of nowhere. Fields to the right, fields to the left, and an abandoned airport. This is where all asylum seekers are transferred, from the sea to a prison. Some of these buildings are not detention centers, but open centers where asylum seekers can stay while waiting for their documents. Apart from being able to leave, the conditions inside open centers and detention centers are the same. The area feels completely abandoned. There is only one shop nearby and a military station. It is very isolated and sometimes it takes an hour for the bus to come, and nobody lives there except for asylum seekers. At the gate of one of the centers, we met a few guys from Sudan, Syria, and Palestine, and they told us that the island felt like a prison and that the human rights are only a facade. After a small chat, we asked if they would like to have an interview with us, but they did not want to. They said that they were afraid of possible repercussions against them if they talked with us. Now, the climate in Malta is very scary, and we met many asylum seekers who were too afraid to talk with us.
Now, and increasingly more often, clients come with this fear that they're going to be deported of all ages. You know, they read something in the news or they hear from the rest of their community that, you know, people from their country are being detained and being removed. And everybody you meet who spent time in detention in Malta is afraid to go back. I think every day someone will speak to somebody that they're afraid to go back into detention, and it's really...
So maybe this is the reason why we've been struggling to have people talk to us. Have there been cases of repercussion from speaking out?
Look, it's difficult for us to say that that's something that happened, especially when the something that happens is, in a sense, in accordance with the law, okay? That it's done as a consequence of, or with an intention to get back at somebody who speaks out. But the reality is that we can't exclude it either. You know, we can't exclude it either. And I think what we see is that in general, people are really very reluctant to speak out, even when they are in detention and they're suffering terrible violations of their rights sometimes, especially if they're being detained arbitrarily. They are actually very reluctant to speak out because they are afraid, and they're very conscious of the fact that they're outsiders, and that at every point, almost, they depend on decisions taken by the government who they would be expected to proceed against. I mean, imagine, you know, I mean, it's...
So it's not just people who have arrived by boats that are scared of speaking up in Malta. It's also Maltese people and people from other communities living in Malta. Malta has around 1/4 of the population is non-Maltese, and in particular third country nationals, but then more so people, travelers like the ones we have been speaking about, who don't even have a residence permit, only have a police certificate. Of course, they're going to be much more scared of speaking out because they know that their stay in this country can be removed very easily.
Deportations are common in Malta. This is what happened to Costi, an Ivorian man who received a deportation order in January 2023. He was put in the same detention centers where first arriving migrants are placed. But Costi had been living in Malta for 13 years. He had a family and had opened a barber salon. As of the time of the production of this podcast, he's still waiting to know his fate. Like him, many other people remain in this state of limbo in Malta. You may have heard about the deportation of migrants on the news, maybe even thought that it made sense that people without documents are not allowed to stay here. But migrants cross the Mediterranean Sea. Some spend months in detention centers, then struggle for many years to get residency permit. Learn the language, follow the laws, adapt to culture, and endure racism and discrimination. Although we are told we are safe, people can still be detained and deported even if they have spent years of their life in Europe. And some are sent back to places where they had to flee from in the first place. This is how stable of a life it can be sometimes.
There's one thing that keeps me going despite all this, and it is the kindness and humanity that I was shown when I first came here. And I don't want what happened to be, a failure story. We want to make it a successful story. And when I speak about it, I want to speak about it that I was shown a solidarity, and that solidarity has made me who I am today. I don't want that solidarity, to go without the story being told. And that's why I try my best, to make a good future for myself. And even if I can, to try to bring others with me together who we are, like for example the migrant, people who come with me in the same boat or people who came in different boat. I want them also, if I can, to encourage them so we make this story a successful story. And my message to them is to be positive and to look at things in a positive way despite what is going on, and try to make changes in people's lives. And for those who are doing solidarity and those that are the beneficiaries, we want to make this story successful by doing all we can to make it successful. We are already here, we are part of the society, and any bad thing that happened to us happened to the society. We are not coming here with that idea. We want this society to strive together so we can live in dignity and respect and being respected.
This is Migration Chronicle, your window into the human cost of border politics. We explore the stories of those who endure violence, detention, and endless waiting for recognition. We are the illegalized people of Europe, migrants on the move, asylum seekers. The media and politicians paint narrative about us but rarely listen to our voices. Thank you for listening and for seeking the truth beyond the dehumanizing headlines. I'm your host Mohammed Ba, and this is the City Rights Radio. The Migration Chronicle series was written and co-directed together with Ricardo Biji, with the editorial supervision by Usama Al-Sayad, and brought to you by the Here to Support. Stay tuned for the next episode.